Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today we're looking at the Inzone M3, which is Sony's second gaming monitor to hit the market after the relatively successful launch of the Inzone M9 last year. While it's less true now, the M9 was worth recommending as a product back when it came out, so I thought it would be worth checking out the M3 to see what Sony can achieve in a lower product tier. The Inzone M3 is quite a different monitor in many ways. It retains the same 27-inch panel size, but drops the resolution to 1080p, increases the refresh rate to 240Hz, and continues to use IPS technology. Sony also aren't touting as solid of an HDR experience, with just worthless display HDR400 branding and no local dimming. A great shame considering the M9 came with at least a basic HDR experience through 96 zone FALD. But still, there is a place for high refresh rate 1080p displays in the market today, and this one does pack typical gamer features like G-Sync compatible support. While 1080p monitors do have their place in the market, mostly for entry-level buyers, Sony has priced the Inzone M3 quite high with an MSRP of $530 US. At this sort of price, the M3 would basically have to be the best 1080p monitor on the market, so let's see whether they can live up to that standard. The M3 uses a very similar design to the Inzone M9 with its odd stand layout, white plastic, and general aesthetic that matches the PlayStation 5. The M9 designs seem to be pretty polarizing, with a lot of you not really liking the stand legs that point forward. Personally, I think it looks okay. It has reasonably slim bezels and the white plastic rear is nice and minimalistic. However, there are a few functional issues here, like the very limited range of height adjustment. Even with this inclusion, the monitor sits quite low on a desk. It's also quite a thick and chunky display, which really isn't necessary for this sort of panel. As for ports, it's a bit of an interesting one. We're getting one DisplayPort 1.4, two HDMI ports, and USB-C with DP Alt mode. All ports support 240Hz refresh rates, and curiously, Sony are advertising these ports as HDMI 2.1. However, HDMI 2.1 isn't actually required for the bandwidth of 1080p 240Hz, and indeed a quick investigation reveals these ports do not support HDMI 2.1's FRL mode, instead sticking to TMDS, which was supported with HDMI 2.0. However, the M3 does support HDMI 2.1's auto low latency mode and VRR, so I wouldn't go as far to say this is fake HDMI 2.1, it's basically a mixture of HDMI 2.0 and 2.1 features that does make sense for a 1080p 240Hz display. In terms of the on-screen display, it's controllable through a directional toggle and is quick and easy to navigate. It has a standard range of color controls plus a few gaming-specific features such as crosshairs and a frame rate counter. It also supports some PlayStation 5 specific functionality such as auto picture mode and auto HDR tone mapping. However, I think these are less relevant for the M3 as a PS5 can't take any real advantage of the 240Hz refresh rate in games. PC users do gain access to a KVM switch though, which is becoming increasingly popular across many monitors. Motion performance is an interesting one. The M3 provides 3 overdrive settings, the first of which is standard that provides a classic overdrive off experience. This means no overshoot at any refresh rate, however at 240Hz this mode clearly is not fast enough to keep up with the refresh rate, producing only a 10.4 millisecond response time. When we bump up to the fast setting, we see average, though not amazing performance at this refresh rate. Response times have increased to 5.45 milliseconds on average, but overall the monitor falls short of acceptable refresh compliance, with only 47% of transitions completing within the refresh window at 240Hz. Overshoot and cumulative deviation are both low, but I'd really want to see a faster than 5 millisecond response time in this class of product. Unfortunately, the faster mode isn't the solution. This mode introduces a significant amount of inverse ghosting due to high levels of overshoot, leading to worse cumulative deviation than the prior mode despite a good response average. I think this mode was included purely so Sony could advertise 1 millisecond response times, as many transitions are in the 1 millisecond range here, but practically speaking this mode is not usable. What's even less ideal about the Inzone M3's motion performance is response behavior across the refresh rate range, which matters for variable refresh gamers. Using the fast mode, the monitor is definitely usable at 200Hz and overshoot isn't that problematic until we reach around 144Hz and below. For lower refresh rates, it's clear that the overdrive level is too high, leading to noticeable inverse ghosting, especially at say 100Hz or 60Hz. Variable overdrive is not being used here either, so gamers wanting to utilize a lower refresh rate will have to drop down to the standard mode, which is quite slow. This is a poorly tuned overdrive setup in my opinion. As an expensive 1080p 240Hz monitor, I'd be wanting a single overdrive mode experience that delivers great speed and low overshoot at all refresh rates. The Inzone M3 doesn't provide this, meaning buyers will need to switch between two settings for the optimal experience depending on the refresh rate. On top of this, none of the included modes are especially well tuned or optimized. There should be a mode between standard and fast, and possibly a mode between fast and faster for 240Hz gaming. Compared to other monitors, the Inzone M3 provides an average experience. The response times on offer here are quite similar to the Inzone M9, but less efficient due to the higher refresh rate. The M3 is quite similar to the BenQ EX2510 in performance and superior to some older 1080p 240Hz models such as the VG279QM. However, it doesn't live up to some other models at their highest refresh rate, such as the PX279 Prime from Pixio and Gigabyte's M27QX. The bigger issue with the M3 is its performance on average across the refresh range. The M3 here has among the highest inverse ghosting rate of the monitors in the chart, no different to the PX279 Prime, which also doesn't have a single overdrive mode experience. The PX279 Prime is a $270 monitor, so basically half the price of the M3, while more similarly priced products such as the M27QX deliver a more balanced experience. This is shown more clearly in our cumulative deviation chart, which quantifies the bounce between speed and overshoot into a single metric. The Inzone M3 is no better than the PX279 Prime and falls behind the older ASUS VG279QM. Typically for modern IPS monitors, we're looking for cumulative deviation around the 500 to 600 mark, and the M3 falls just short of this. I think with better tuning or the inclusion of variable overdrive, ideally both, it could push up into this range, but Sony didn't put in the work unfortunately. The lack of overdrive options and poor tuning for the included modes leads to issues with fixed refresh rate comparisons. At 120Hz for example, to get the best experience we had to turn down the overdrive setting to standard as the fast mode had too much overshoot, which hurts its position in the chart. Similar at 60Hz, showing that the M3 is not a good monitor for lower refresh rate gaming. In a more positive note, the M3 has low input latency from its sub 1 millisecond processing delay and fast refresh rate. It is a little held back by response time performance, but typically the M3 will deliver a good experience for latency sensitive gamers. I was disappointed to discover the Inzone M3 does not support backlight strobing, which I feel is a key inclusion in this sort of price range. When you're looking to spend over $500 on a 1080p display, you'd want all the bells and whistles, and competitors such as BenQ and ViewSonic do provide that in this class. Even something like the ASUS VG279QM or MSI MAG251RX do provide this functionality, and sure, it doesn't work flawlessly on those products, but it is an advantage they have. As far as color performance is concerned, the M3 is a standard gamut monitor that covers sRGB only, which is pretty typical for many 1080p high refresh rate monitors. Rec 2020 coverage is therefore quite low, but similar to other models I've tested. What it does mean is that the color space is not sufficient for HDR, despite Sony advertising HDR support. Factory calibration is poor in its default mode, mostly around white balance, which is too cool, leading to poor delta E's. Saturation is also somewhat off for an sRGB monitor. It's a bit oversaturated due to the settings used in the OSD by default, rather than a byproduct of a wide gamut, which this display doesn't have. In general, it doesn't look great out of the box and requires some OSD tweaking. Luckily though, Sony do provide color options to deliver a much better color experience. After tweaking, only the gamma performance wasn't ideal, but delta E's across the board have improved significantly, so it is possible to get quite a usable experience. However, I wasn't able to get it to the level of proper hardware calibration, so for that a full calibration is required. We use CalMan software, and like for a lot of modern monitors, the results are very solid. Just don't expect anything beyond sRGB or Rec 709 from this display. Maximum brightness is good at 421 nits, which actually increased quite a bit after calibration, so that will be plenty for most use cases. Minimum brightness is a bit below average though, as I could only get it as low as 65 nits. The contrast ratio is pretty good here. 1232 to 1 is above average for an IPS monitor, though below average in terms of overall panel technology, as of course VA monitors do provide a significantly higher contrast ratio and deeper blacks. As for viewing angles, they are good, while uniformity was also solid without being amazing. IPS glow is a small issue here, but this does vary between units, so you may get a monitor that behaves differently to mine in that area. Last part of this review is the Hub Essentials checklist, which looks to see whether Sony are accurately advertising their product and whether it meets basic minimum performance standards. In the first section, Sony does an acceptable job with a few borderline results, such as HDMI 2.1 related things that we discussed earlier, and the occasional marketing image that gets the bezel size wrong. However, the majority of images on Sony's website show the correct bezel size, so I don't think a full penalty is fair. The color performance of this monitor is properly advertised, however motion performance includes a few penalties, such as for reporting a 1 millisecond response time. While this is listed as in the faster mode on Sony's spec sheet, this mode isn't usable in practice, and even there it doesn't really average a 1 millisecond response. Sony also fails to include backlight strobing, and refresh compliance is low. HDR is advertised for the M3, which I feel is misleading, as the product does not include any real HDR hardware, as it lacks local dimming and doesn't even include a wide color gamut, so don't buy this for HDR performance. The issues and defects section is largely positive for Sony, although I did experience some coil whine when using the monitor at low refresh rates such as 60Hz. This isn't really a firmware issue, but I felt it did need to be included here as it's a rare issue. This coil whine is coming from the monitor and not its external power brick, so I expect but can't confirm for sure that it will be an issue in all countries, as it seems to be an issue with the internal hardware after voltage conversion from the brick. In any case, Australia uses 230 volts 50 Hz power for reference. After thoroughly testing the Sony Inzone M3, it's pretty clear that I can't recommend this monitor. And on this occasion, I think it goes beyond the M3 being a poorly priced display, which it is. I just don't think this is a very good 1080p 240Hz monitor. It has mediocre performance relative to other products with the same specs, it omits key features, and has a few annoyances like coil whine. The biggest problem in my opinion is that the M3 is positioned as a display for those that want performance, but it fails to live up to that positioning. After all, why else would you buy a 1080p 240Hz monitor these days? You'd obviously want the refresh rate and the speed that it brings. But the M3's overdrive settings aren't tuned well enough to deliver great 240Hz, and it lacks a single overdrive mode experience, which leads to terrible results for lower refresh rates. Looking beyond motion performance, the M3 is a fairly average product. It only offers a standard color gamut, it isn't particularly well tuned at the factory, and offers absolutely nothing in the way of HDR aside from supporting HDR signals. It also only has a 1080p resolution, which isn't ideal at a 27-inch screen size. Many of our viewers have expressed that 1440p is the minimum you'd consider at this size, at least these days. What makes matters worse is the terrible price tag of $530 US, which is far too high for a product with these specifications. Most of the competition right now is sitting in the $260 to $320 range as far as 1080p 240Hz IPS is concerned. Based on that, the Inzone M3 is $250 too expensive, which is pretty brutal. The only way a price tag of around $500 could be justified in 2023 would be if the Inzone had class-leading performance, especially for things like backlight strobing. Not even including backlight strobing at all is a fail. So right now with current pricing, I'd go one of two ways. If you do have $500 to spend, you can get an easy upgrade to a 1440p 240Hz monitor, which will give you a much better gaming experience. In fact, the Gigabyte M27QX we recommend is often less than $500. Alternatively, if you want a 1080p 240Hz monitor, grab one of the many competing options around $300 US. I'd only consider the Inzone M3 if it was less than $300 or the equivalent of that in your country. So yeah, a bit of a learning experience for Sony here, but that comes with being a new entrant in the monitor market, and I do hope they take this feedback on board to improve next time around. Anyway, that's it for this review of the Inzone M3. If you do want to support the channel and the independent testing that we do, we have our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links are in the description below. If you sign up there, you get access to some neat bonuses like the ICC profiles we create for these reviews. We have our Discord chat We have monthly live streams, all sorts of good stuff there. We also have links in the description below to check out pricing for the monitors that we've been talking about in this video. So if you're watching this video several months after it went live, those links will give you more up-to-date information. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.